100 million Super Cubs. 14 million combustion engines produced every single year, more than any other company on Earth. The first Japanese automaker to manufacture cars on American soil, with factories in 33 countries and 208,000 people building everything from lawnmowers to Formula One power units. When you see that H badge, you're looking at one of the most quietly dominant industrial empires the 20th century produced. Behind it is one man, a blacksmith's son who never completed an engineering degree, whose first factory was flattened by an earthquake, whose second and third were destroyed by American bombing raids, who lost his first major Toyota contract because his parts were too badly made to use, and who was told by the Japanese government to stop trying to build cars and go back to motorcycles. He ignored all of it, every single time. The paradox at the center of this story is this: the man who openly mocked academic credentials and forged his own school seal to avoid his parents seeing his grades, built one of the most technically sophisticated engineering organizations in the world. You thought you knew the Honda story. You don't know Soichiro. If this is the kind of story you come here for, the real mechanics, not the press kit version, subscribe. That's what this channel is for. Now, back to 1906. Soichiro Honda was born on November 17, 1906, in Komio, a small village in Shizuoka Prefecture. His father, Gihei, was a blacksmith, not the romanticized kind, a working craftsman who repaired farm tools and later taught himself bicycle repair when gasoline vehicles began appearing in the region. What that environment gave Soichiro wasn't sentimentality about handcraft, it was something more specific. He grew up watching mechanical problems get solved by people who didn't have access to the right tools, so they made different ones. That habit of mind never left him. At 15, he left for Tokyo without finishing school and found work as an apprentice at Art Shokai, an auto repair shop run by a man named Yuzo Sakakibara. His job for the first year was to clean the shop and watch, nothing else. He was not allowed to touch a car. He watched anyway. Every repair, every adjustment, every diagnostic decision. By 17, he had built a race car from salvaged parts that won multiple regional competitions and set a new average speed record at the All Japan Speed Rally. He was a teenager who had never taken a formal engineering class. He eventually returned to Hamamatsu and opened his own branch of Art Shokai. When he was 30, he entered a race at the Tamagawa Speedway in 1936 and crashed at high speed. The accident broke his face in multiple places, dislocated his shoulder, and put him out of commission for months. He never raced again. He later said the accident shifted everything inward. If he couldn't be the driver, he would be the engineer who built the machine that won. Every engine he touched after that, he called his child. He wanted to manufacture piston rings, the components that seal the gap between a cylinder and its piston. He'd identified the need watching American and European engines outperform Japanese ones in races, and traced part of the difference to component quality. He founded Tokai Seiki Heavy Industry in 1937 and won a supply contract with Toyota. Then his rings failed Toyota's quality inspection. Again and again. The rejection rate was unacceptable, and Toyota was specific about why. The metallurgical composition of the rings wasn't consistent enough to maintain tolerance under heat. Here is what the surface version of this story leaves out. Honda enrolled in Hamamatsu Technical High School to study metallurgy, not as a student seeking a degree, but as a man trying to solve a specific manufacturing problem while running a company. He attended irregularly. His presence at the school was, by any institutional measure, a disaster. The school president reportedly told him that his attendance certificate was worth less than a cinema ticket, because at least a cinema ticket guaranteed you'd get in somewhere. Honda agreed with this assessment, thanked him, and left without a degree. He later said he wanted the knowledge, not the document. He got the knowledge. By 1941, after 2 years of iteration, his rings were passing Toyota's tests. Then the war took everything. Japan's wartime mobilization in the early 1940s disrupted every material supply chain. When Honda needed to expand his production facility, cement was essentially unavailable, allocated entirely to military construction. So he developed his own concrete formula. It worked. He built the facility. Then, in 1944 and 1945, U.S. bombing raids destroyed 2 of his factories. A major earthquake in the Mikawa region destroyed what the bombs hadn't reached. In 1945, Soichiro Honda sold what remained of Tokai Seiki to Toyota for 450,000 yen. It cleared every debt he had. Nothing was left over. Then he did nothing for nearly 2 years. He drank sake, he played shogi, he hosted neighbors. By every outward measure, he had stopped. What he was actually doing was watching. Japan in 1945 had millions of people and almost no functioning transportation infrastructure. Trains were overcrowded and unreliable. Cars were unavailable to ordinary people. Gasoline was scarce. But there were bicycles, enormous numbers of broken, barely functional bicycles, and there were surplus military engines. The Imperial Japanese Army had stockpiled small Tohatsu engines, roughly 50 cubic centimeters displacement, for use in portable communications equipment and generators. The Army had no more use for them. They were sitting in warehouses. Honda bought a quantity of them for almost nothing. He fitted one to a bicycle frame using a custom mount he built himself. It moved. He sold it to a neighbor. The neighbor told other people. Honda made more. He called it the Type A, not a motorcycle technically, because it was still mostly a bicycle, and he sold them door to door because there were no retail channels functioning in post-war Japan. He wrote letters to bicycle shop owners across the country explaining what he was doing. More than 5,000 wrote back asking for supply. In 1948, he founded Honda Motor Company. A year later, he met the man who would make the company viable. Takeo Fujisawa was not an engineer. He had been a sales manager, a distributor, and a financial organizer, someone who understood how products move from manufacturers to customers, how capital flows, and how to build distribution infrastructure from scratch. He came to Honda through a mutual contact and proposed a partnership. Honda accepted without much deliberation, and the terms were almost never formalized beyond a handshake arrangement. Fujisawa handled everything outside the workshop: distribution, finance, dealer relationships, capital raises, and Soichiro handled everything inside. They maintained that division for 24 years without a written contract of any significance. Honda later said the company could not have survived without Fujisawa. He didn't mean it modestly. He meant it as a precise statement of operational fact. Fujisawa's first major contribution was building a distributor network at exactly the moment Honda's engineers were redesigning the engine. Honda's second major product, the Dream D-Type, used a redesigned 4-stroke engine that Soichiro had developed by analyzing why 2-stroke engines were inefficient at sustained speed. The technical solution, a modified combustion chamber geometry that improved fuel burn completion, doubled horsepower without increasing displacement. It mattered for racing first, it mattered for production second, but the sequence was intentional. Honda understood that winning races was the fastest way to communicate engineering credibility to buyers who couldn't assess it directly. By 1959, Honda entered the Isle of Man TT, the most prestigious motorcycle race in the world, dominated by British manufacturers for 3 decades. Honda placed multiple machines in the top 10 on its first attempt. By 1961, Honda won outright in the 125 cubic centimeters and 250 cubic centimeters classes, beating established European manufacturers in their home territory. The margin in the 250 cubic centimeter class was significant enough that British motorcycle journalists spent the following month writing explanations for how it had happened. But the race Honda was really running wasn't at the Isle of Man. It was in American hardware stores. In 1958, Soichiro Honda introduced the Super Cub, a 49 cubic centimeter step-through frame motorcycle with a 4-speed automatic transmission, no clutch lever, and a single thumb-operated starter. The step-through frame wasn't an aesthetic decision, it was deliberate inclusion engineering. Someone in work clothes, a skirt, or a business suit could mount it without swinging a leg over anything. The design specifically targeted people who had never owned a motorcycle and were not being served by any existing product in that category. When Honda's American operation launched in California in 1959, the instinct of every established distributor in the country was to sell through motorcycle dealerships. Honda's team declined. They identified that motorcycle dealerships in America in 1959 carried a specific cultural freight: leather, speed, the shadow of Brando and Dean, that would never attract the customer Honda was actually targeting. Instead, they placed the Super Cub in sporting goods stores, hobby shops, and hardware stores, places where people who had actively avoided motorcycles shopped for other things. The campaign that repositioned American motorcycle culture was written by a UCLA advertising student named Gary Gray as a class assignment. His professor graded it a B. Honda's American marketing team bought the rights to it for a few $100s. The tagline, "You meet the nicest people on a Honda," ran across magazines and television from 1963 onward and systematically dismantled the Brando-era image of the American motorcycle rider. Within 12 months of the campaign launching, Honda held nearly 50% of all U.S. motorcycle sales. American revenue went from $500,000 in 1960 to just under $80 million in 1965. Honda was producing 100,000 motorcycles per month by the middle of the decade. The three largest American motorcycle distributors combined were managing 15,000 units per year. The domestic industry had effectively already lost before they understood what they were competing against. Here is something the Super Cub story typically leaves out, and it matters for everything that comes next. That campaign, the largest repositioning of a consumer vehicle category in American history, was bought for a few $100s from a student whose professor thought it was a B- idea. And when Honda's American team reported those revenue numbers back to the major U.S. automakers, General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler looked at them and still did not consider Honda a serious competitor in four-wheel vehicles. That decision, to dismiss what had just happened in two-wheeled transport, was about to become extraordinarily expensive. In 1963, Honda launched its first car, the T360, a small truck designed for the Japanese domestic market. It didn't gain meaningful traction. 2 years later, the Japanese Ministry of International Trade and Industry issued what amounted to a directive. Honda should consolidate into motorcycles and stop attempting to build cars. The ministry was actively restructuring the Japanese automotive industry around Toyota and Nissan, and considered Honda too small and too late to be viable. The directive carried bureaucratic weight and significant institutional pressure. It had no legal enforcement mechanism. Soichiro Honda knew this. He continued building cars anyway, not as an act of defiance, but as the practical conclusion of a calculation. The ministry could not stop him, so he didn't stop. The United States Congress passed the Clean Air Act in 1970. The emissions standards it established were, by any existing automotive technology's measurement, aggressive. In 1972, executives from General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler testified before a U.S. Senate subcommittee, under oath, that the targets in the legislation were physically impossible to meet with current engineering. Their position was that the Clean Air Act's automotive provisions needed to be delayed by at least 5 years. They said this with authority, with supporting data, and with the understanding that they were the world's largest automotive manufacturers and therefore would know. A Honda representative then testified that Honda had already built an engine that passed the emissions test without a catalytic converter. The senators did not believe him. He presented the engine data anyway. The engine was the CVCC, compound vortex controlled combustion, and its approach was structurally different from every competing solution. Instead of treating exhaust after combustion, It introduced a third, leaner fuel mixture into a pre-chamber adjacent to the main cylinder, igniting more completely and producing dramatically fewer harmful byproducts before exhaust ever formed. The engine passed the federal test in 1972. The Honda Civic launched in 1973. It weighed approximately 1,500 pounds. Its base retail price was around $2,000. Its fuel consumption was among the lowest of any car sold in the United States. Also in 1973, the OPEC oil embargo began, gasoline prices quadrupled, and Americans who had never considered a small, fuel-efficient Japanese car began buying them in significant volume. Honda had not planned for the embargo, nobody had, but they had already done the work, which meant the timing landed in their favor with the precision of something that had been arranged. In 1982, Honda opened a manufacturing plant in Marysville, Ohio, the first Japanese automobile company to produce cars on American soil. The quality of Accords assembled in Ohio, tested against units assembled in Japan, was statistically identical. This disproved a narrative the American auto industry had been using as a competitive shield for more than a decade, that quality manufacturing and automotive production required Japanese workers, Japanese management culture, or Japanese facilities. Marysville showed that it required Honda's system, applied to any sufficiently trained workforce anywhere. Soichiro Honda died on August 5, 1991. He was 84 years old. At the time of his death, Honda had won the Formula One Constructors' Championship 6 consecutive times, was the third largest automaker in the United States, and had just delivered the NSX, a mid-engine aluminum chassis supercar that competed directly with the Ferrari 348 and Porsche 911 at roughly two-thirds the price of the Ferrari. Ayrton Senna had tested a pre-production NSX at the Nürburgring and told Honda's engineers it was too stiff. The suspension was redesigned. The process added 3 weeks to the production schedule. Honda's engineers didn't argue with the assessment. That version, the one Senna signed off on, is the one that shipped. What Soichiro saw before he died, the NSX, Asimo's first internal research stages, the Formula One dynasty, and the Marysville plant running at full capacity. What he didn't see, how the culture he'd built would respond when tested without him. 24 months after his death, it was tested. In 1993, an investigation revealed that Honda regional managers, including vice presidents, had been accepting payments from dealerships seeking exclusive franchise rights and favorable vehicle allocation. Documented individual amounts range from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars. The scandal reached into multiple levels of the regional management structure and contradicted everything the company had publicly stated about its dealer relationships. Honda's response was not primarily a communications exercise. The company restructured its entire dealer allocation system, removing discretionary authority from regional management and centralizing inventory distribution through criteria that removed the human judgment calls that had enabled the payments. The fix was structural. That's not how companies managed by public relations respond to scandal. That's how companies built around process integrity respond. It was, as much as any product decision made after 1991, a Soichiro move. Honda had begun its humanoid robotics research program in 1986, 5 years before the founder died, with a specific engineering objective: build a machine capable of moving through spaces designed for human bodies. Not a factory robot, not a vehicle. A machine that could climb stairs, open doors, and navigate corridors. Asimo was publicly unveiled in 2000. It walks. It runs at up to 9 kilometers per hour. It recognizes faces and voices. It cannot reliably carry an object from one room to another across uneven flooring without losing balance. Honda has never commercialized it. They continue funding it as a long-term research platform, and the engineering knowledge accumulated through Asimo feeds directly into Honda's autonomous vehicle and assistive mobility programs. There is no expected product launch. The research continues regardless. The Honda Jet, the HA420, entered commercial service in 2015, though Honda's aviation research began in the 1980s, and Soichiro approved the initial feasibility work before his death. Its most distinctive feature is its engine placement. The turbofans sit above and forward of the wings, rather than below the wings or at the rear of the fuselage. This configuration, which every conventional aircraft design principle argues against, reduces cabin noise by moving engine vibration away from the fuselage, increases aerodynamic efficiency by reducing interference drag, and frees usable space in the cabin that would otherwise be consumed by structural accommodations for rear-mounted engines. A fully certified business jet. Current price per unit, approximately $5 million. Honda has delivered fewer than 200. What remains 67 years after a man with no engineering degree and a forged family seal built his first motorized bicycle in a city without gasoline? 14 million combustion engines produced annually, more than any other company. 17 million motorcycles sold in India last year alone, compared to 500,000 in the United States. 5 million cars, 208,000 employees, factories in 33 countries, the 8th largest automaker by volume, the largest engine manufacturer by unit count on Earth. And the Super Cub, introduced in 1958, still in continuous production, over 100 million units built, designed by a man with no degree for people who had never considered owning a motor vehicle, sold through hardware stores on the strength of a B- homework assignment. It is the most produced motor vehicle in human history. The man who built it was told, at various points, that his parts were too badly made. His schools were wasted on him. His factories were gone. His car ambitions were unwelcome, and his emissions claims were impossible. He kept notes on all of it. Some of it he framed. Drop a comment. Do you think Honda would be the same company today if Soichiro had listened to the Ministry of Trade in 1965?